The 8-bit generation will always hold a special place in my heart. There's really something to be said about how developers would try to wring out as much content, gameplay and visual style out of consoles and computers that today would barely pass as calculators. So today, I thought it would be fun to take a look at several incredible 8-bit games that usually do not get talked about. Oh, and also, for this video, I'll be considering the PC Engine a 16-bit system, because, I mean, look at it! And I'll also be considering the Neo Geo Pocket Color an 8-bit system. So, let's get started! Getsu Fūma then is an action platformer RPG hybrid created by Konami for the Nintendo Famicom that was only ever released in Japan. The game has a strong Japanese medieval horror theme and is stylistically very similar to Namco's Genpei Tomaden series, though as far as I know, the two are completely unrelated. You begin in this overworld where you can choose your next level, go to shrines to receive helpful hints, or visit shops to buy items. Once you reach a level, the game then becomes a side-scroller, and you have to reach the end of the stage while dispatching enemies as well as collect money. It should be noted that the overworld is pretty massive, and it's very easy to get lost in. Not only that, but the game often requires you to travel back and forth between levels, as sometimes you'll find your path blocked because you do not have the right item to progress, which usually means that you either have to buy the correct item at the correct vendors or acquire something by defeating bosses. Not only that, but the game will often require you to travel back and forth between levels. It's also pretty interesting to see how some levels can be more difficult or easier depending on whether you're traveling back or forth. After buying an item, you can pause the game during a stage to select which item you want to equip or have on hand. Though be careful, as many of these are single-use only and the game doesn't actually tell you what they do, so having a manual or guide on hand will come in handy. The good news is that farming for a lot of these items is fairly easy, as I found a spot pretty early on where each enemy would give me 20 gold. Overall though, this is a pretty great game and one I recommend checking out. Just remember to install a translation patch. Rodland
phrasing
is a single-screen arcade platformer that was originally launched in arcades before being brought over to the NES, though this version only ever came out in Japan and Europe. Playing this gives me some serious Bubble Bobble flashbacks, and I mean that in a very good way. You play as two anime fairies trying to rescue their mom who was kidnapped by a monster, and your goal is to dispatch every enemy in each level. You do this by tying up enemies with your magic and then beat them into submission using your big fat rod.
Phrasing?
And you have to do this for every enemy on screen. But some will also drop weapons which will activate once you walk over them, making your job much easier and faster. Additionally, if you collect every flower before dispatching your enemies, you play the extra game, in which enemies become more aggressive, but will also drop ladders upon defeat, which can grant you an extra life. And you can also create ladders above or below you to reach other platforms. One thing I really like about the NES version is how it gives you all these extra options, like changing the color of your sprite, or you can also rename your character. And if you choose a naughty word, your character will even turn red from embarrassment. Oh, that is adorable. This is a pretty great game, especially if you're into titles like Bubble Bobble. Now, Rodland was also brought over to a slew of 8-bit computers, and honestly, these versions aren't very good, so we'll just take a quick look at each one, starting with the ZX Spectrum. The gameplay in this one is fast and fluid, but the lack of music and color really holds it back. This is just not the kind of game that benefits from having a dark color palette or lack of cheery music. Rodland was also brought over to the Amstrad CPC. This version retains the colorful aesthetic but is now held back by the Amstrad's trademark low resolution and low speed. It feels like the game is just dragging along with every action I take. Additionally, because the system's resolution is so low, the levels were all crunched to fit a single screen, which makes the game feel pretty claustrophobic. And it has no music either. So as a whole, I can't really recommend this version either. Rodland was also brought over to the Commodore 64, and I feel that this is the best of the 8-bit home computer versions, as it runs fast and it has some color, though not as much as the NES or Amstrad CPC versions. Once again though, this version has no music, which is surprising, because if there's one thing where the Commodore 64 excelled at, was its sound chip. Rodland would also come to the Nintendo Game Boy, and this is a vast improvement over the 8-bit home computers. The gameplay is fast and smooth, and I feel the sprite work is actually better than the NES version. And I also think that I like the music here a little better as well. Unfortunately, in order to avoid crunching the levels like they did for the Amstrad, this version has you scroll through them. The issue is that this makes it more difficult to plan ahead, or you might spend some time looking for that one enemy that you missed and you just cannot find. I feel the NES version is the way to go here, but the Game Boy port is a close second. Of course, you could also play the arcade original, and if you're feeling really frisky, the Amiga port. But if you're looking for a single-screen arcade platformer for your NES or Game Boy, Rodland is definitely a good one. Kickmaster is an action platformer for the NES created by Taito. The first thing that immediately jumps out to me are the visuals, which look pretty incredible for the system it's on. I especially like the colorful backgrounds. But what really sets Kickmaster apart is how deep its mechanics go. You see, your main character has a wide variety of moves. How wide, you ask? Wide enough that the game has a tutorial in the options menu for each and every move. When was the last time you saw an NES game that did that? Not only that, but this game has a few RPG elements in it. As you dispatch enemies, they'll drop 3 items and you have to be quick to even get a single one. These can be health or mana recovery items, experience points, or even items that chip away at your health. As you collect experience points, you'll level up, which increases your maximum HP, and you also gain new kick maneuvers for your character. Not only that, but each level has 2 spells that will get added to your inventory. The first spell is optional and will usually require you to actually find it, while the second one, you get it by defeating the stage's boss. It's kind of incredible how many mechanics you have to juggle in this game. Add to that some nice cutscenes, high production values, and a pretty brilliant art style, and you have an incredible game that is not mentioned enough. Lunar Walking School is a JRPG released exclusively in Japan for the Sega Game Gear. This is a spin-off of the Lunar series, though there's really no connection between them, so you don't have to know anything about the previous games to play this. You play as 2 girls, Ellie and Lena, who are recruited to a magic school, and that's it, that's the plot. Honestly, this kind of plays more like a light-hearted slice-of-life anime than it does a regular JRPG, with the game being divided into self-contained chapters that basically work as individual episodes in an anime series, with very little continuity tying them together. And you know what? I like that. It's a nice change of pace, and I like this almost TV series pacing to the game. Combat is turn-based, though because you're in a magic school, every character is a magic user, meaning your physical attacks are mostly useless and should only be employed in pure desperation. So the strategy mostly comes from having to manage your mana between your party members, which is easier said than done when the encounter rate is as high as it is here. Which is also the biggest issue I have with this game. Now, this game would also be remade for the Sega Saturn, which I've sadly never played. I'm not even sure if it's even been translated yet. But if you're in the mood for a light-hearted, slice-of-life anime JRPG, check this one out. Psychic World is an action platformer for the Sega Master System. You play as an anime girl doing scientific research when your sister was kidnapped and you don a special ESP equipment to save her. This is a pretty unique game in that it starts out pretty simple, but as you progress, you'll gain powers which you can access through this menu. Some of these are different types of shots like fire or ice, which can be used to melt barriers or create ice platforms to jump on. Others can be abilities like floating or a shield that blocks any and all damage. Using the different shots is free, but the floating or shield abilities will consume ESP, which can be recharged by picking up items that enemies will occasionally drop. Though honestly, the shield pretty much breaks this game, as it makes you impervious to everything, and it consumes very little ESP. Thankfully, the game is still super fun despite this. No joke, this is one of my favorite Master System games. It's incredibly fun building your own platforms to reach secrets, higher places, or to defeat bosses. And your arsenal becomes immensely more interesting the further you get into the game. Not only that, but your various shots can receive permanent upgrades, and different types of enemies are invulnerable to different types of shots. My one big gripe with this game are the graphics. The sprite work, backgrounds, and colors are so simple that it honestly looks more like an NES game than it does a Master System one. This is not a dig at the NES, but come on, the Master System can do better than this. This is an incredible game with some inventive platforming and ideas, and I highly recommend you check it out. Psychic World would also come to the Sega Game Gear, and believe it or not, this is not a straight port from the Master System. For starters, many of the cutscenes were remade and the graphics are now much closer to what I actually expected the Master System version to look like, with more detailed sprites and better use of color. With that said though, there are some weird things with this port. For starters, level 1 and 2 were cut up and fused into a single stage. Not only that, but the remaining levels also feel a little shorter. And mind you, the Master System game was already a relatively short game to begin with, so this does not help things. But on the other hand, I feel the levels here are actually more interesting. You get the power-ups sooner and in ways that you would not expect, which in turn makes the level design more interesting. The game's difficulty was also rebalanced so that enemies don't drop as many ESP recovery items, so you can't just abuse the shield as much as you did on the Master System. Another weird thing is that as you approach the final stages, the backgrounds take a major nosedive and the game becomes graphically much closer to its Master System counterpart. If I had to guess, I would say this version was rushed and the devs could not finish it properly. But still, this is a really interesting version. All my life I've heard the Master System version was the way to go, but after playing Psychic World on the Game Gear, I don't know, I kinda feel like they both have their strengths and weaknesses. But if you really wanna get out there, why not check out the MSX original? This game was only ever launched in Japan, and it's the version where the Master System and Game Gear ports originally came from. Once again, the panels are different from the two Sega counterparts, but I gotta say, this art style is way better. Man, we were robbed in the West. Not only that, but the music is also really good, making very good use of FM audio. Sadly though, the graphics are where this version falters. It's by far the worst looking game of the group, and it's also probably why the Master System version looked so basic. But on the other hand, it has a nice attention to detail that the other versions do not, like when I climb this ladder and the clouds dissipate the higher I go. It's also the longest game with bigger and more stages, and the hardest with some genuinely difficult platforming. The shield is still just as OP as before, but just like the Game Gear version, you have to conserve your ESP meter. Oh, and also, during the final battle, the MSX original pretty much turns into Dragon Ball, something which was highly nerfed in the Sega versions, turning them into little more than a playable cutscene. I think that this is the best version of the game, but at the same time, there's no one definitive way to play this. Really, every version has its own strengths and weaknesses, so if you get the chance, just play all three of them. Power Blade is an action platformer created by Natsume for the NES. You play as this Arnold Schwarzenegger cyberpunk looking dude, and you have to infiltrate a major facility whose main computer has gone rogue. You're armed with a boomerang, which at first has a pretty low range, but you'll soon find upgrades that increase its speed and power. You can select the order of the stages you want to tackle, and once inside, you have to explore the levels and look for your contact, who will then give you a key to go and fight that stage's boss. Now, the cool thing here is that you can pick up grenades and health items which get added to your inventory, and they can be used whenever you feel like it. Additionally, you'll also find this mech suit power-up which gives you more health and makes your attacks way more powerful. And let me tell you, once you're powered up, these bosses become complete pushovers. The graphics are pretty great for the system too, giving me some neat Mega Man vibes, and man, do I love the music, especially that level 1 theme. This is such a good game, and it's such a shame that it's never been made available in a compilation disc. Now, believe it or not, in Japan, Power Blade, or Power Blazer as it's known over there, was a very different game. For starters, your Arnold Schwarzenegger lookalike is now replaced with this anime dude, and boy, if the US version already reminded me of Mega Man before, now it's impossible not to think of Capcom's Blue Bomber while playing this. Unfortunately though, this version is far worse than Power Blade. For starters, the levels are completely different. This is not just a minor change here and there. No, they have practically nothing in common other than the enemies which are carried over between both versions. You have the same power-up system, which includes your inventory, but man, I don't know what it is with this game, but you'll be hard-pressed to find any of them. I finished the first level without running into a single power-up, and on my second level, I found exactly one power-up. These things are worth their weight in gold in this version, and it just feels like such a weird design choice. The soundtrack is almost the same for both games. Overall, this game's fine, but stick with Power Blade instead. Power Blade would be followed up by Power Blade 2 in 1992. This game takes everything that was good from Power Blade 1 and cranks it up to 11. Though the graphics now remind me a lot more of Sunsoft's Batman than they do Mega Man. Once again, you have your boomerang, which can be upgraded in range, power and speed. But you now also have this neat little slide maneuver which… oh, okay, so I guess there are still some Mega Man here. Your inventory items also make a return, but the real star of the show here are the power armors. The first game had one power armor as a linear upgrade, but here, as you play through the game, you'll often find rooms with an optional boss. Defeat it and you get a new armor. These will significantly boost your attack power, but now also have their own abilities, like hanging onto ceilings and platforms and even fly. Man, this is so cool! The issue is that the armors consume energy, so you gotta watch out for that, and it's a good idea to keep some batteries on hand in your inventory. And let me tell you, with all of these powers and gear, some of these bosses are just complete pushovers. With that said though, I think the developers realized that they perhaps made you a little too powerful, because the stages are filled with instant death hazards. Whether it's falling saws, constantly climbing elevators, swinging fans, or bottomless pits, if there's a way to kill you instantly, you can bet your ass the designers found a way to work it in. But honestly, that does not stop this game from being awesome, and I highly recommend you check it out. Cave Noire is a roguelike RPG for the Nintendo Game Boy created by Konami and released exclusively in Japan. This is definitely an interesting one. Basically, you have 4 quest types you can take, each with its own dedicated dungeon and multiple levels per quest. They can range from killing a certain amount of enemies, find enough gold, orbs, or free caged fairies. The interesting thing here is that there are no experience points or leveling system. Your stats are entirely based on the gear you find throughout your adventures, but your inventory is also limited, especially if you're doing the orb quest, which also takes up valuable space. Add to that you need room for your weapon, shield, recovery items, antidotes, or other helpful items like invisibility or lighting up dark rooms, and that you only have 8 inventory slots and the game is constantly requiring you to make some pretty difficult decisions. Now, regardless of whether you die or complete a quest, you will always lose all of your inventory, and your reward for success is unlocking the next level of that particular dungeon. And while the dungeons, enemies, and chests are randomly generated, the game isn't so much dependent on luck or RNG as it is on your choices. Do you feel this dungeon floor is too difficult? Drop down a hole and skip it entirely, and hope the next floor has an easier RNG. Enemies too difficult? Avoid them entirely. It's all up to you, and at times Cave Noire feels more like a puzzle game than it does an RPG. There really is nothing quite like this on the Game Boy, and I urge you to try it out. Daikatana is an 8-bit remake for the Game Boy Color of the infamous John Romero first-person shooter. This game was only ever launched in Japan and Europe. Not sure why they skipped over the US, which is where I assume the PC version probably sold better. Anyway, unlike the PC game, this is a Zelda clone, except it's much more linear and there are no towns or cities to visit. The game follows the same plot as the PC version, meaning that you are Hiro Miyamoto and you need to steal the Daikatana, a magical sword with time-traveling abilities from the Mishima clan. Along the way, you'll meet the same sidekicks you do in the PC version and even play as them. But near as I can tell, there's very little difference between them and the main character other than them being locked out of some weapons in your inventory. You travel from screen to screen, solve puzzles, acquire new weapons and ammo for said weapons, and occasionally you'll have an NPC who gives you hints on what you have to do. The areas you explore are relatively small, and as you progress through the game, you become locked out of the previous zones you've been to, which also has the side effect of making the puzzles relatively simple. So you could say that the entire game is structured like one big Zelda dungeon, albeit quite a bit easier than Zelda. Overall, I quite like this game, though the translation is a bit iffy in places and the music isn't the best, but still, check it out, it's a good game. Power Strike 2 is a shmup for the Sega Master System and is part of the Aleste series, which you might know better under the name Musha. It's the 1930s and you're out to hunt Italian sky pirates with your futuristic anime ship. The first thing that stands out to me with this game are the amazing colorful graphics with detailed backgrounds. But what's really impressive here is the amount of sprites you see on screen and how many the game can handle without slowing down. This isn't to say that there is no slowdown. Yes, it exists, but between its speed, graphics, and number of objects on screen, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was a 16-bit game. Add to that some pretty incredible music and the incredibly fun power-up system from the Aleste and Musha series, and you have yourself an incredible game. This is honestly the best shmup on the Master System and in my opinion one of the two best 8-bit shmups ever made, as I believe there's only one other 8-bit shmup that can rival Power Strike 2. And that other 8-bit shmup is... Power Strike 2! Yes, Power Strike 2 for the Sega Game Gear. Same name, same genre, same series, same developer, but a totally different game. Unlike the Master System version, this one is set in space, and the levels, enemies, and bosses are completely different, though the power-up system remains mostly the same. Although now, between levels you have this afterburner-like stage in which you need to lock onto enemies before firing, which is a nice change of pace. Personally, I think the graphics on this version are even more impressive than the Master System one, with better use of color and more imaginative bosses. And I also think the music is even better in this one, as this might just be my favorite Game Gear soundtrack. With that said though, this game isn't pushing as many sprites as the Master System game, and it's a bit more prone to slowdown as well. Now, the bad news is that both the Master System and Game Gear games are incredibly expensive to come by. The good news though is that there's a PS4 compilation disc released only in Japan which has the entire Sega 8-bit Aleste lineup. My advice? Buy it now before it gets equally expensive. Fighters 2000 is a bootleg fighting game for the Game Boy Color. If this game is looking remarkably similar to SNK's Gale Fighters for the Neo Geo Pocket Color for you, then that's because that was the intent of this game. The difference is that with this being an unofficial title, the developers could do whatever they want. And boy, did they ever took advantage of that. For starters, you have characters that are clearly inspired by whatever was popular in Asia during this period, with SNK's Athena and King being replaced with Cardcaptor Sakura and Rinoa from Final Fantasy VIII respectively. They also went ahead and included Capcom characters into this game, including a sexy nurse who plays like Morrigan, a doctor who plays like Chun-Li, and even a female Ryu. Oh, but we're not done yet, because this game also has a tag team feature, something that is not even included in the official SNK Geld Fighters game. Add to that the graphics are pretty impressive for the Game Boy Color, and that you have combos, super moves and counters, and you honestly have one of the best fighting games for the Game Boy Color. Of course, tracking this game down is nearly impossible, so my recommendation is play it any way you can. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Aliens Neoplasma is a modern game for the ZX Spectrum released in 2019. The game takes place within the Aliens franchise, though you play as an original character named Lieutenant Ashley. You wake up aboard your cargo ship only to realize that everyone is gone and the ship has now been overrun with xenomorphs, though you have no idea what they are. The ship's AI seems to be either corrupted or lying to you, hinting that this may have all been orchestrated by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. At first, you have no means of self-defense and must progress through the game while avoiding enemies, but eventually you pick up a pulse rifle and grenades. The game controls very similarly to Alien 3 for the Sega Mega Drive, with the sprites being clearly inspired by that version. The difference is that while the Sega version of Alien 3 was a fast-paced arcade game, this is actually closer to a Metroidvania. I mean, I'm not gonna say that this is a full-on Metroidvania because you do not get any new abilities. Instead, you have to progress through the maze-like ship and find computers which will open previously locked doors and prompt more dialogue scenes with the AI. The game is very stingy with ammo and health, as you often have to backtrack to or look for new healing and ammo stations. Because of this, it's usually best to wait until a facehugger or xenomorph goes away or think of the most cost-effective way of dispatching them. These include leading them to vents or crushing them with the automated doors. This game is a really interesting mix of survival horror and quasi-Metroidvania that is very much worth your time. Oh, and the music is awesome too. Dark Arms is an action RPG for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. You play as this SNK looking dude and you created a contract with this dude to hunt down demons. So now you go around the various areas in the game and fire at zombies, skeletons, ghosts, and other creatures of the night to capture their souls. Once you complete an area, you can go back to your base and use the captured souls to create new weapons or level up and improve existing ones. So for example, you can apply souls to increase the experience points of a weapon, but certain souls also add attributes like fire. The thing is, if you use these weapons, you'll be causing more damage, but you will not be able to capture their souls. So ideally, you have to weaken your foes using your new weapons and then send the finishing shot with your starting weapon to capture them. Along the way, you'll also have puzzles to solve and NPCs to help who give you information or items that you need to progress. When people think of the Neo Geo Pocket Color, they only ever really talk about Metal Slug and the various fighting games. But this is a pretty interesting and unique RPG that is definitely worth your time. Speaking of weird and unique RPGs, how about Survival Kids by Konami for the Game Boy Color? This is an RPG in which you play as a kid stranded on an island and your objective, as the name implies, is to survive. So you go around the island collecting stuff like clams, grass, fruit, sticks, and whatever else you need to survive. And you do all of this while taking into account various stats like hunger, thirst, and how tired you are. So for example, you go to a river to collect water. You use a knife to bring down snakes and cook their meat. But if you keep that meat around for too long, it'll spoil. Man, if I had a nickel for every time Konami made a game where you're in the jungle taking out snakes and eating their meat before it gets spoiled, I'd have 2 nickels.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
But yeah, this is a pretty unique game, and I like how you have to be careful of status ailments like getting paralyzed or need to collect random things that you can combine to create useful items. Like for example, you can combine sticks and tree bark to form kindling, but you cannot use that to make a fire while it's raining outside. Why yes, this is an 8-bit Game Boy Color game with a weather system and even a day-to-night cycle. Man, this game is just so ambitious that I can't help but to absolutely adore it. Check it out if you can. Phantis is a super unique game for the ZX Spectrum. This game is an interesting mix of different genres, with the first 3 levels being a shmup where you fire at incoming ships before plunging into the depths of the planet to a level that reminds me of Life Force. After that, we get to ride a Tauntaun, where you launch this sparkly ball at hordes of foes as you make your way to the next stage, where then it suddenly becomes a platformer. Here, you control your Space Amazon and you have this giant ball thing that follows you and takes out enemies. It can be a little difficult to control both you and the ball at first, but it soon becomes second nature. And after that, you find the weapon and it now becomes an action platformer, where you also have to find items and upgrades to progress. Man, this is such an ambitious mix of genres, and I like how even with these crude graphics, the developers still found a way to make every level feel visually different and unique. Also, there's an unofficial remake of this game being sold on Steam called Ultionus, A Tale of Petty Revenge. The game claims to be a love letter to Phantis, but honestly, it's just a straight up remake. Not that I have anything against it, as the game is pretty darn cool, with great pixel art and a stellar soundtrack by the same composer behind games like Shantae and the Shovel Knight. And it has an incredible ending theme. I usually feel that a lot of 8-bit computer games have aged poorly. And while, yeah, Phantis definitely shows its age, it's such a strange and unique game that I cannot help but love it. Check it out if you can. Shatterhand is an action platformer released in 1991 for the NES. You play as this red-looking dude who can destroy walls with his bare fists. Your punching range is extremely limited, and between that, the visuals, and the awesome music, it kind of reminds me of Batman for the NES. Now the cool thing here is that throughout the various levels, you'll find these symbols, and creating different combinations will net you different power-ups in the form of robo-buddies. These can be robots that use giant swords, fire shots at an angle, or even bouncing shots. And the awesome thing is that there are 8 different robo buddies that you can get. The issue is memorizing which symbol combination gives you what. Yeah, it might be a good idea to have a guide on hand with this one just for that. Enemies will also drop coins upon defeat, which you can spin at these stations to heal or power up. And you also got this cool grappling mechanic. This game can also go from easy to extremely difficult in an instant, mostly because it sort of relies on you having the right robo buddy with you at the right time. Like, no joke, if you have the right power-up, many bosses turn into complete pushovers. But lose that power-up and suddenly you're down to your short-range fists. But yeah, this game is honestly incredible and I love its sense of style. Definitely check this one out. Kabuki Quantum Fighter is another action platformer for the NES that also reminds me of Sunsoft's Batman. Man, there's a lot of these. The game begins with a lengthy intro cutscene about how you're a very young Neil Patrick Harris and you're being sent into cyberspace to stop some rogue programs. Except, once there, you realize you've now been turned into a Kabuki actor. And if you think that's weird, the reason is that this game was actually supposed to be a tie-in to a movie called Zipang, which I've never seen or heard of until making this video. Anyway, like Batman, your range of attack is extremely limited, and you'll often have to rely on your sub-weapons. At first, you only have a basic shot, but you gain new sub-weapons as you defeat bosses. But these will also consume ammo, of which there's not a lot of it, so I honestly avoid fighting whenever I can. In fact, this game's strengths are in its visuals, music, and the platforming. The backgrounds are a mix of computers and cyberpunk with 8-bit body horror like giant beating hearts, which is pretty cool, and the platforming is honestly really fun. And I also really like the smooth frames of animation in these platforms. That was not very common for 8-bit games. And the music kind of feels like it was composed by an 8-bit Euro developer. I can't be the only one who notices this, right? It sounds so much like 8-bit Euro chiptunes. This game is super tough, but very much worth the playthrough. Please give it a shot if you ever get the chance. And there you have it, a random selection of 25 8-bit games that in my opinion are absolute hidden gems. Are there any games I missed? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all my Patreon supporters, including Anthony Ryan Bennett, Apple, Ben Harradine, Jandru, Liquid Farts, and Tomenza. Thank you for helping make the channel better. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!